The Formed Book Club. Catholic book lovers unpacking good books, chapter by chapter.
Welcome to the Formed Book Club. We are going to conclude our discussion of this phenomenally profound and rich book, The Drama of Atheist Humanism, which we're still involved in the drama right now, by Father Henri de Lubac, S.J., who was my mentor many, many years ago. And we concluded our last session on page 477 at the squiggly mark. How do you describe that thing? I don't know.
A typographical ornament.
Okay.
I like squiggly mark better, but there we are.
As I said, a squiggly mark. Joseph, lead us through this.
Well, I already mentioned in the last session about the references to paramnesiac phenomenon and cryptomnesiac phenomenon. Father Sotolange's quote about the brain of fire burns away memories as soon as a new burst of its interior flame comes to surprise it. And we took this as a launching pad last time to talk about the fact that Nietzsche was not as original as he thought he was, or pretended to be, because it's not really clear whether he genuinely forgets or chooses not to remember, so to speak. But the same theme is continued on page 479 here. This is de Lubac reminding us that even the idea of the Übermensch, the Superman, so towards the bottom of page 479, that new paragraph there, the idea of the Overman was itself not so new. Herder and Goethe, among others, had already conceived of it. So even the trademark, if you like, of Nietzsche, the idea of the Übermenschen and the Untermenschen is not something new. The man is not as original as he would have us believe.
Well, he also gives us the dilemma that Nietzsche was in when he receives this flash of lightning inspiration, so-called, of the eternal return and so on, that he was kind of stuck, He had to choose between these two things, either a resigned acceptance of a cycle that will always bring back the same unchanged elements, making the same progressions succeed the same instances of decay, or else a being's effort to grow, to contrive new values. That's what Übermenschen do. They invent their own right and wrong, to surpass itself always and ever to impose its law. So Nietzsche saw that there was an built-in contradiction between his idea of the Übermenschen and the eternal return. And without a doubt, it could be replied with Ernst Horneffer that the great, strong, happy being has nothing to fear from the law of eternal return, since he can only desire to recover that life which fulfills him. So Nietzsche is caught in a dilemma that he himself has put himself in. And now we're going to watch him struggling and lashing to get out of it. And it's literally going to lead to the destruction of his mind. He is going to descend into insanity. So whatever this familiar spirit who was going to be his friend and make him into something great, he was standing at the edge of an abyss. And
I think the problem is, psychologically and theologically, that because of his pride, he can't admit to himself and or certainly to others that he's wrong. Right, that takes humility, right? To confess an error and to say that my fundamental beliefs for the whole of my life have been wrong, and I recant. Well, that requires humility, and if you're blinded by pride and maddened by pride, you're going to try to live with the contradictions until it drives you mad.
Right, and then we might recall too. This chapter is. Following it, is it part of the new man? The search for the new man? It's the second. But in any case, Nietzsche was in search of a new man. And as we all know, he was a student in a Protestant seminary. He was destined for the clergy, the Protestant clergy or whatever. At some point in his youth, he rejected Christ, rejected Christianity. So the only real invitation to becoming a new man in Christ, an offer made by God, an offer has to be received as a gift. He refuses that. Now he's going to set about to try to make himself into a new man in some other way. Well, does it work out for him?
Yeah, well, and that's, I mean, in a certain sense, one might see this chapter as sort of a denouement to this whole book.
Right.
What's it doing? And it also, it wasn't part of the original. It was a talk he gave or an article he wrote, whatever. However, it is in a sense a perfect pendant to the whole book, because what is the drama of atheist humanism? It's the attempt by man to fulfill himself without God.
Mm-hmm.
And so where does that lead? It leads to, on the one hand, well, I've got to build the superior man, the overman. But all I can see is eternal return, again and again, rising, falling, and it eventually destroys my mind. So that's to try and have a new man without the new man, capital N, capital M, in Christ, leads to insanity.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think, Father, you've really hit something, a nail on the head there, because you called it denouement. I mean, I think it's very significant that de Lubac chooses to end his drama, right, the drama of atheist humanism. So this book, although it's a work of non-fiction, in some sense is a drama, right? It's a work of art in itself. And of course, it's going to end with a denouement, something which brings it to a conclusion. And what's the conclusion? Basically, is that the pride begins as a tragedy and then ends as a dark comedy, the reductio ad absurdum, right? That it ends up with a nothing but absurdity. And so it's a very dark comedy. The drama of atheist humanism ends up by eating itself like the serpent.
Also, I reread the book we recently published at Ignatius Press called What is Christianity by Pope Benedict XVI. His last writings, things he did not publish for the most part while he was alive. And, you know, if we don't all have some questions or even doubts about our faith, then we're probably not thinking about it enough, because it's hard to believe that what Christ has promised is really true. But here's a 95-year-old man. I'm reading his writings, and it's so clear, it's so beautiful, it's so rich, it's so profound. I'm thinking, Nietzsche's philosophy, brilliant as he was, great writer as he was, leads to insanity. Benedict's writings, his thought leads to what? Clarity, limpidness, purity, profound, depth. And I think, even if I have my doubts about my faith, if this man believes in Christ the way he does, then who am I to not believe in Christ? It's everything he's written is so clear. I mean, Lubac talks here about how Christ has to illumine what man really is, and that's what Benedict was all his life, and it was just one beautiful presentation after another, which strike the chord of reality. But the comparison between Benedict and Nietzsche is striking.
Well, and
what you see, I mean, that in Pope Benedict is that sanity and sanctity ultimately are one, right? There's indissolubly united as faith and reason. That sanity and sanctity are one. Well, if that's true, right, then the absence of sanctity rooted in pride is going to lead to insanity. So we see, if you like, if Nietzsche's the anti-Christ in some sense, he's also the anti-Christian, he's also the anti-saint, right? So he's the opposite, the antithesis of Pope Benedict XVI.
And yet, here's this beautiful. I hope I'm not jumping too far. If we're trying to finish today, then maybe I'm not. But on page 493,
Jump.
Yeah.
de Lubac says, "Poor Nietzsche, the poor great man, so profoundly human, so smitten with purity, victim of so many deceptive phantoms. He aspired to a total yes. He wanted to persuade himself that he had finally declared it in the simplicity of rediscovered childhood, amor fati. May this henceforth be my love," and so on. How far he was from it, however. But you see here, there's another place where de Lubac might be still coming, where he says he only feels pity for him, a brotherly affection and pity, because the man, the potential for his greatness, and this goes back to the tragic figure, right? The tragic figures of Shakespeare, the only reason why we feel sorry for them is because we see what greatness they could have had if it hadn't been for their tragic flaw. And here, de Lubac is giving a tremendous nod to what Nietzsche could have been if the great yes he wanted to give, he could have had the humility to give it to God.
Yeah.
Instead, he ends up as we've already described.
Well, we are recording this on All Souls Day. And in respect to what you just said, Vivian, Again from Inspire has this vision of purgatory, which is we die, we face Christ, and we see who we were meant to be when God created us and what we've become, the great gap. And that's going to be a source of terrible pain for us.
Mm-hmm.
So this applies to Nietzsche here too, in the sense of what did God intend for Nietzsche? With all the talent he had, what he could have done as a disciple, as an evangelist, as a proclaimer of the truth, and what happened.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Joseph, what's next?
Well, yeah. So I'm going with Vivian's flow and taking things on from 494 where she left off here.
Well, you can go back if you want. You can retrogress here like you have done in other areas.
Well, I've only got one other thing anyway prior to that, so we can go back to that if you like. It's 488, middle of the page. Again, speaking, of course, of Nietzsche, there is no divinity, so no God. There are no objective essences, no eternal ideas. There is nothing that resembles a Platonic world. As a result, there is no ontology. As rigorous as the necessity may be that it engenders for those who undergo it, fatum is pure contingency, because it is pure invention, a throw of the dice, a divine fantasy, a dance in the middle of an empty sky. First of all, that's great prose. But what we see here is what has been abandoned is realism. And again, the modern world doesn't understand what realism is in the full philosophical sense that Plato and Aristotle and Augustine and Aquinas understand it. That reality is rooted, right, in eternal verities, supernatural or metaphysical verities, and the physical cosmos is a manifestation of those metaphysical verities. Once you take that away, you're left with this ultimate absurdity, where if there's no cause, there's nothing beyond, then we have this nothing but contingency, nothing but invention, nothing but chance, nothing but a throw of the dance, nothing throw of the dice, nothing but a meaningless dance in the middle of nothing. That's all you're left with. That's all that he's left with. And if that's the case, if there's no natura naturans, to use the phrase there, what do you end up with? You end up with what you get with Nietzsche. You end up with insanity.
Well, and it's a wheel that just goes round and round and round and round that's going nowhere. And so not only is it bleak enough the way you've just described it, that's already bleak enough. Now this goes on forever, and I can't ever get off this wheel. I can't ever get out of my. I mean, of course, there's several lines in here where if this doesn't kill hope, I don't know what does. Of course it leads to despair.
Yeah. And what's the alternative? Well, the alternative is the divine. And what does he say on page 495? God is dead. Superior men, this God has been your greatest danger. You can only be brought back to life when he lies in the tomb. So, the only escape from this madness is something that's our enemy that we have to destroy. And again, the logic of this, page 496, 2/3 of the way down, this is Nietzsche speaking. If we do not wish to fall prey again to the old idea of a creator, we don't want to fall into a belief in God, we must put another thing in his place. And this other thing, this will be the eternal return. Whether one wishes to or not, this paradox must be upheld, since he who refuses to believe that the universe is marked by a circular process is constrained to believe in a sovereign, absolute God. So if we do not believe it, if we do not believe in this in this eternal circle of nothingness and meaninglessness, we have no choice but to believe in God.
Right.
And the reverse or obverse or whatever that is, that if you reject belief in God, what's left? Eternal return. But even that, I'm not sure how much physics Nietzsche knew, but the second law of thermodynamics was known in his time, that it's not an eternal return. It's running down. The universe is decrepit like I am, and like we all are eventually. It's going to greatest entropy where it will not return again. It'll just wind down to an isothermic heat bath. That is, no reactions at all.
And so the eternal return is imperative as the indispensable substitute for a dead God. That's after what you just read, Joseph.
Yeah.
But then a word jumped out at me, that word resentment again. Remember, Lubach said at the very beginning that this rebellion against God, against a creator, is born out of a resentment toward him. And there's this word resentment again. It says at the very heart of this great decision, the Nietzschean attitude, therefore, is indeed less a positive, affirmative attitude, that yes, that he wanted to say but never did, than an attitude still of opposition. And let us use the word resentment. In other words, it's out of, he says elsewhere, it's out of jealousy. Oh, he goes on. Nietzsche will not stop being, this is the top of 497. Nietzsche will not stop being haunted right to his last day by the figure of Jesus. With respect to Jesus, he passes alternately between admiration and denigration, tenderness and sarcasm, which can be explained by a secret jealousy. So here we again see the demonic. Why does Lucifer rebel against God? Why does he seek the ruin of the human race? Because he is jealous of Christ.
Yeah. And what I love about this as well, it does actually reduce Nietzsche's philosophy to psychology, to actually subjective psychology, to Nietzsche's own psychology. In other words, that these are his philosophical precepts are constructs rooted in a desire to rout Christ, which is itself a consequence of his own jealousy and resentment of the figure of Christ. So again, what I love about de Lubac here, I mean, this is the drama of atheist humanism. It's not only about cold reason. This is about men who have motives, right? This is a drama, right? And their philosophies can be a consequence of their psychological states. And I think this is brilliant by de Lubac to actually penetrate to Nietzsche's psyche in order to understand the man and therefore his ideas.
And
especially
he said,
Nietzsche's philosophy is rooted, he proclaims it, in subjectivity, right? He rejects objectivity. It's all about subjectivity. So there is absolutely legitimate on those grounds to say, well, let's look at the subject here. Let's look at Nietzsche himself.
Vivian?
Well, de Lubac said earlier in the book that there's two kinds of discernment that are needed in understanding these modern atheistic, humanistic ideologies. The one is an intellectual discernment, and the other is a spiritual discernment. You really won't, as you say, Joseph, penetrate what's going on here without both of those things. And so I thought it was interesting also that this is the end of the book, because this is a spiritual discernment of really the state of a man's soul.
And you look at the bottom of it here, continue that resentment thing, the bottom of page 497. This is almost creepy. That last full sentence on the page. In Jesus Christ, all is yes. Nietzsche, alas, is the man of resentment. So, this does really put Nietzsche into the role of the Antichrist, or into the role of the demonic or the satanic. He refuses the yes, right? And he is motivated in that refusal by a resentment.
Yes.
Well, because we are Christians and believe that Jesus Christ was truly the Son of God, when Nietzsche treats him as just another historical figure and then criticizes him, it seems blasphemous to us. But if you accept the premise that he doesn't accept the divinity of Christ, then, all right, he's going to interpret Christ in a different way and will be resentful because this mere man has promoted weakness and subservience and obedience over, self-assertion and so on, and have resentment. And so I can see humanly why he would have that resentment. But again, that's just another proof to me. If you don't take Christ for who he says he is, but treat him as a mere man and a rival, then what becomes of you? You try and replace him, and it's like, I don't know, trying to eat too much. You can't digest it all, and you end up vomiting.
The other piece of that is the resentment. That is, the other piece of this resentment is, so the man rejects Christ, and yet, as Nietzsche, de Lubac says, he remains haunted by him because the very standards the critics of Christianity use to judge Christianity are the standards of Christ. When you meet with people who are just so bitterly hurt by their experience of Christianity or the church, and they talk about hypocrisy, and they talk about pride, and they talk about corruption, and they talk about, all the things that they see in the human family, all the sins and foibles, everything else. And they start listing all these atrocities that were perpetrated by crusaders and inquisitors and blah, 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 blah. And you want to say, yes, that is right. Those things were wrong. You were correct to point those out. But where's your yardstick coming from that makes those things wrong? Are you not using the standard of Christ to judge the Christian? And fine, we stand judge, go for it. However, you don't have Christ to use as a yardstick, so you're going to have to come up with another one. But they can't, and Nietzsche couldn't either, and that's why he's continually haunted. So he's resentful. He knows he's a man under judgment. He knows that the judgment, he's flogging all of his neighbors and the church and Christians, everything. He can't escape Christ, and this causes pain and resentment.
Cognitive dissonance, emotional dissonance, psychological dissonance, no question about it.
I've got more highlighted, and we're obviously running out of time here, so I'm going to skip a lot of my highlighting.
Please.
Go ahead.
Cut to the chase, so to speak. So let's look at this at the bottom of page 506. I mean, this is where we maybe do pity him. Well, first let's go to page 505. This is Nietzsche speaking, giving a warning to those who will follow his ideas. He says, in truth, I advise you, get far away from me.
Mhm.
Defend yourself against Zarathustra. Better still, be ashamed of him. Perhaps he has deceived you. You venerate me, but what would happen if your veneration was destroyed one day? Take care not to be crushed by a statue.
Mm.
I mean, this is almost, this is Nietzsche in confessional mode. And then we have Nietzsche in candid mode, page 506. This is Nietzsche here, the indented quote at the bottom there. I will not hide it from you. Things are going very badly. Night overwhelms me more and more. It is as if there had just been a flash of lightning. One moment I find myself plunged into my element, into my light, and now it is past. I believe that I am walking ineluctably to my ruin. The barrel of a gun is now a source of relatively pleasant reflections for me.
Mhm.
So suicide as an escape from himself. And then
Yes.
to his sister, the footnote there, page 114, to his sister in 1887, the worst periods of sickness, the most unhappy ones, did not seem as painful and as empty of hope as my present existence.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
He's plunged in despair.
No hope. There's no hope.
And that's where, on the next page, that's where de Lubac says, we shall certainly not reproach him with this, but we shall rather turn our fraternal pity to him.
Where's this? Sorry.
The middle of 507.
Yeah.
And that's a really important corrective for us who call ourselves Christians, right? To not lose that fraternal pity toward the members of the human family who are lost.
Yeah, we can see. I mean, I see parallels. Being someone who loves Shakespeare, I see parallels here with Macbeth. The man who begins with nobility, and then because of egocentrism, he goes mad himself and is very destructive in the whole thing. So perhaps we can finish, unless you want to say, I want to just finish with the way the Lubac ends on page 509 there. So maybe I'll stand aside and let anybody else have their final say before we let de Lubac have his.
No?
I have nothing more.
Go ahead, Joseph.
Well, just the final two sentences, that this mystic, Nietzsche, does not need anybody to refute him. He takes care of this task himself. So he's self-defeating.
And that's what Lubac has done with the whole book.
Mm-hmm.
He's showing these great figures, how they all lead to contradiction, confusion, and insanity. That's the drama of atheist humanism. So next session will begin with a phenomenal book, The Lost Manual of Heaven. Vivian was the one that really edited this. This began as a 650-page manuscript, I believe.
Yeah.
And fascinating with all the data was in it. And Vivian, God bless her, she brought it down to 300 pages. But so tell us what's in it.
Well, this is the story of, as the subtitle says, the American betrayal of Diem, president of Vietnam, the president before the Vietnam War really got underway. And this Canadian military historian shows that it was the American betrayal of this man that really cost us the war. And that was a real injustice also. And anyway, it's fascinating read. And by the way, talk about the drama of atheist humanism. What was this man fighting but the communist takeover of Vietnam? After fighting against French colonialism, now he's trying to fight against communism. And it's a good story.
And
please join us.
Let's just remember the fortunate providential coincidence that we will begin reading this during the 60th anniversary of his assassination. So there's a providential anniversary to commemorate. I must say celebrate, but to commemorate.
Yes, thank you.
Don't miss it. We'll see you then. God bless you all.
If you enjoyed this discussion, please help spread the word about the Forum Book Club by subscribing to the podcast and writing a review. You can sign up for weekly updates at forumedbookclub.ignatius.com.